everybody. Welcome to Chapter 16, Making It in the Community. This is about offenders returning to society after prison, right? So the parolees we discussed the other day for the most part. Let's start with this. Returning to society is a shock. It's like going through a time warp. We're going to talk about this later on, but everything that you've experienced before you went in has changed. Normal events can seem overwhelming for you. Offenders that have so-called paid their debt to society are now given a clean start, but that clean start isn't so clean, right? The question we want to ask is that true clean start truly clean? And you can decide as we go on. So community supervision. Restrictions that are on parolees are intended to allow gradual adjustment to the real world. So it's designed to help them avoid old habits, but there's a very little effective preparation to go from a very highly structured life to a life that's much more loose with temptations in the quote-unquote free world. So overload is possible, and it's likely even probable because of the social, psychological, and material changes. So you're living in an 8x10 box, cement and iron box. You have some free time, and then you're living in a home or an apartment somewhere, probably a halfway house, and you have freedoms, but now everyone that you knew from inside, it's a whole different group of people, and they may also have been inside, but it's not the people that you were used to, and you are still not quite with your family yet either. So that's why it's a transition. It's a halfway house or halfway home. But there are social implications, there are psychological implications, and there are material implications. So you expect that you're free and you're going to get what comes with being a free citizen, but it's not given to you right away. So the unrealized expectation of what you wanted to experience didn't come through, and so that puts a lot of pressure on the parolee or the released offender. 25% fail in the first 6 months. Right? They either commit a new crime or they have a technical violation. So when you have a violation, there's 2 stages to assess the validity of the violation and how serious it is, right? So the 2 stages are, there's a probable cause hearing, which is something that's very similar to that happens after an arrest, and a parole board review. So the Supreme Court has dictated that these 2 stages must occur before you can be returned to prison. So you fail a drug test, you've been arrested for shoplifting or something, and so your parole a violation has been put on you. You get put back into some sort of incarceration while you await for this 2-stage process to occur. The initial probable cause hearing happens relatively quickly, right? So within the first 24 hours or so. If it's on a weekend, it'll be up to 72 hours. But it happens relatively quickly. Is the evidence reasonable enough that any normal average citizen would agree that yes, this violation occurred? And if they say yes, then they decide whether or not they're going to keep you in prison or still allow you to be on the outside while they plan this parole board review. If you're held inside, that usually pushes the parole board review up. If you're not inside, then it'll take a little longer. But generally speaking, it's resolved within 3 to 6 months. 35% of new prison admissions are based on parole violations of some kind. The structure in the outside world, right? There are 3 forces that impact your structure: the parole officer, the parole bureaucracy, and your personal experiences. So parole officers have 2 roles. They are cops, they enforce the rules, and then they are social workers, and their job is to assist the parolee, the releasee, with adjustment, right? Their clients with adjustment. There are multiple approaches, and this is the same type of a situation that happens in police work and any other law enforcement role. You have a parental approach, potentially a welfare-driven approach, punitive approach, or a passive approach. Let's talk about each of these. Right? The approach impacts the relationship with the parolee. But for some people, it doesn't even matter to them whether or not you're friends or you like them or not. They're simply there to do their job. And when you read that article that you have to write an essay for this week from Vice.com, it'll give you a couple of different perspectives on what the parolee life is like, right? So parental is somebody who is supervising you and trying to guide you and trying to help you learn. And these are not children we're talking about. They're definitely adults, and very often they're adults with age, so in their 30s, 40s, even 50s. So the parental approach can be a little condescending. And it could be coming from somebody who's younger. So you're interacting with someone who's much younger than you, and they're trying to tell you how to go on with your life. Now, they may have really valid information, but it might be hard for you to accept that information. The welfare approach, where it's all about helping you and making things better. But if there's too much welfare approach and not enough enforcement of the rules, they're setting you up for failure, right? There's the potential for them not to guide you away from trouble. The punitive approach is just that strict, do what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, don't deviate, and we'll get along fine. And that's still treating them as if they're still incarcerated, because you're giving them all the rules, you're dictating the behavior, you're controlling as much of the behavior as you can. And then the passive approach. You give them a list of things to do, you make sure they do it, and you do nothing more than that, right? The passive approach. And a lot of that has to do with the caseload that you have as a parole officer. You may not have much more time than to take a passive approach. But essentially, the emphasis is either on control or support. And if you're trying to find a balance between the control and the support, it's a very difficult thing to do, but probably worth the effort if you can pull it off, right? So, are you an ally or an adversary? Right? There are two personalities involved. So each personality, there's always the saying, you have a parole officer with, say, 100 parolees, and he is not going to communicate effectively with all of them. That's just the way it is in life. As you go through life, you see people how you can see eye to eye, you can communicate effectively, you can form bonds with, and other people you cannot. And some parole officers aren't interested in a bond with you, because when you fail, it's too much for them. Or they've judged you as being the person who's least eligible, and so they're only going to give you the amount of time that they have to give you in order to keep their jobs. So, and the parolee may not want to be told what to do anymore. Or he may need a lot of guidance, and he might have a parole officer that doesn't give him a lot of guidance, or her a lot of guidance. So there's a whole lot involved with the different personalities. Residential programs are essentially the heart of community corrections. Right? Residential programs are, for the most part, halfway houses and work release centers. Right? So the halfway houses, work release centers, they provide you with access to counseling, treatment, and they have a curfew. Right? So the counseling and the treatment may be a condition of your parole, but it may not be a condition of your parole. It may just be a recommendation for you to get your life going in the right direction. And either way, it still might be hard for the parolee to participate in that. And if they do participate in it, maybe they won't participate in it fully or take it seriously because they are just tired of being told what to do. So if they do live in those halfway houses, once again, you've got different personalities there that we talked about that make it a difficult social, psychological, and material adjustment, right? Work release centers, they find jobs for you. These jobs are generally very low on the pay scale. They're menial labor, messengers, working in kitchens, working in cleaning places, and each place that you work for has its own rules about hiring ex-cons. So generally what they do is they hire a vendor who does a background check on you, but they don't ask for a lot of details about it, and that's their way of allowing an access for somebody who's released from prison to have a start in life. But very often, if the people that are working in the corporation find out that there are ex-cons working, they can sometimes complain about that because they don't feel safe. When I was at one of my major corporations that I worked at, we had the Aramark vendor that does a lot of other things. Well, Aramark runs a lot of the kitchens in New York State, and they train people who are in prison to work in kitchens, and then when they get out, they hire them in kitchens, and those kitchens are all over New York City. Now, most of these people, there is no problems. There are no stealing, there's no violence, there's no nothing. They're just going to work, they're getting their paycheck, and they're going home to their halfway house or to where they reside, and their life just moves forward. But every once in a while something happens, and then a light is shined that some of these people are ex-convicts, and it causes a little bit of an uproar, as it did when I worked in this corporation. I think that we always have to try to remember that these are individuals, and just because one did something wrong doesn't mean that they're all going to do something wrong. So even here, we talk about the 25% fail in the first 6 months. That means 75% succeed. But our text, we choose to focus on the 25% that fail. So you have to try to keep that in mind, right? So the function of community corrections is you work during the day and you're home at night, right? And you have this, generally speaking, you often have this curfew, right? What is curfew? I know it's written up there somewhere. Okay, it's here somewhere, right? So you have a curfew, right? Did you have to? Oh, there it is. Curfew. You have to be home after work. Now, that may seem like a good thing for you, for outsiders, but for you, once again, you're living under somebody else's control, and as an adult, you're not giving the respect that your maturity, you feel maybe that your maturity should provide you. So, the biggest thing with this is that there is no compelling evidence that this works. There is no compelling evidence that this works, right? So, post-release life. Everyone and everything has changed. Literally everything. You went away, did 5 years. If you had a 1-year-old, that 1-year-old is now 6. If you had a 6-year-old, that 6-year-old is now 11. If you had an 11-year-old, now you got a 16-year-old. So everything has changed. Maybe you had a woman, maybe she waited for you, maybe she didn't. Right? Maybe she now has a new man, and in order to see your kids, you've got to see the new man. And think about when you left this young woman who had your baby, you had a life together, you went away, you came back. It's like going through that time warp where everything around you has changed. The streets are probably changed. You see the way that the way construction is done in New York City, the way construction is done around this country, it happens quick. The lights have changed, the streets have changed, the signs have changed, the people have changed, everything has changed. And you come back into that, maybe with this unrealized expectation of what it's going to be like, and it's completely different, right? Old ties are dangerous ties, because these are very likely the people who you got into trouble with in the first place, right? And your decision-making skills have faded, you know? Your decision, not even decisions about right and wrong, decisions about how you're going to go to work, what you're going to do in the morning, what you're going to do in the evening. Those decision-making skills have faded, and that's one of the reasons why they have halfway houses, to help you learn those decisions again. But the reality is that when you are freed, you are not really free. You are not really free. So here's an extra credit assignment for you. I want a 1-page essay, about 250 words, and I want you to explain how a releasee is not really free. You can use your textbook, you can use this lecture, but whatever, it's got to be thorough, it's got to be complete, and you have to have your own thoughts on how not free these parolees, these releasees are. All right, extra credit worth 5 points towards your final examination. Thank you.